In the 80s and 90s, technology was advancing at a very fast rate. In the 80s, a series of new technologies were introduced. Some of these new technologies include the CD player, the Walkman, and many others. In the 90s, the rise of the internet made everything connected in ways no one could ever imagine. Today, we will be talking to Chris Kolb about his experience of the changing technology of the time. Chris was in high school in the 80s when some of these new technologies were being invented. In the 90s, Chris had graduated from Lynchburg College and was learning about the internet and how it was so much easier to search things with the creation of web browsers. In the 80s, a series of new technologies were introduced. Did you receive any of these new technologies, such as a Walkman, CD, or a VCR for the family, or any new gaming consoles?
I had a Walkman. I got and had CDs. Actually, in the late 80s, I had a Discman, which was a Walkman that played CDs.
Okay.
I had a Atari that I used to play Pong on. So, I had.
Could the battery life of the devices you had in the 80s be similar to devices we have now?
Uh, Much like today, battery life was a problem on Walkman, that they would eat batteries, and same with the Discman had a battery pack that never lasted long enough.
In the 90s, there was a transition from mostly handheld devices to a device that usually stayed in one place. That device was the computer. With the computer also came the creation of the internet. In the 90s, the internet was invented. Can you describe what you had to do in order to use it?
Um, so in the 90s, when first it was primarily just used for email.
Okay.
So it would be like AOL, and all of it was dial up. So your phone or your computer had a modem it hooked into the phone lines, and so you'd be logged into it. I never the games were kind of silly. I thought back then. I mostly just used it for email or for doing work, and really, for up until 2000, it was not web browsers. There weren't nearly websites. So I mean, there was the web browser existed. There were websites, but there was nothing like you. If you wanted to find something on about your computer, you couldn't go look up a computer. It was mostly for education and stuff like that.
Before getting onto the internet to do what you needed to do, you had to dial in. Then you could do whatever you want to do, although it could take some time. But you mentioned before that you had to dial into the internet in order to use it. Did you enjoy doing that or find it super annoying?
It wasn't. It just. It was. It wasn't enjoy or annoying. It just was the way it was. The only thing that was annoying is if you had to download something, it was very slow. So you'd like sometimes start downloading a file and might walk away because it might take 40 minutes to download a file. So obviously that could be kind of irritating. So you'd look at something and go, "Do I really want that? Because it's going to take me half an hour to download it." And but the thing is, before that, at that point, before you had that, you couldn't download anything. So even that was a big step forward. And right off, as soon as they had modems, they'd have faster modems to download stuff faster and so on.
At the time, the internet wasn't very useful, but it was a step in the right direction for what we know the internet to be today. Did you like the idea of the internet and how you could be connected to anything you could imagine at the time?
And that's just it. In the 90s that you're asking, even the very late 90s, you really couldn't look up very much.
Okay.
So, the internet at that point, universities would have some limited content, large companies, but there was none of the entertainment. So, forget YouTube, Facebook, none of these things existed. You couldn't go get, if you need information on your car, I mean, nothing. It wasn't until 2003, 2005 that you started having websites. In the 90s, you really couldn't look anything up. It was purely, it would let you download things. So if I was working on my computer and I wanted to get some updates or some new programs, I could download that. But no looking things up, Google did not exist for all intents and purposes.
Although in the 90s the internet hadn't fully evolved into what we know it to be today, it was still one of the very first building blocks of technology in general. The creation of the Walkman and the Discman slowly evolved into MP3 players and then most recently, iPods and iPhones. Technology from both the 80s and 90s have evolved into what we know technology to be today. Well, that's all the questions I have, so thank you for talking to me.
I'm happy to have this chat, and hopefully you know more about the 80s and the 90s and
Thank you.
technology.
Thank you.
You're